Dealings with the Dead, number 22. Some commendatory passages in your own and other journals, my dear Mr. Transcript, seem very much to me like a theatrical encore. They half persuade me to reappear. There are other considerations which I cannot resist. 20 devils, saith the Spanish proverb, employ that man who employeth not himself. I am quite sensible of my error in quitting an old vocation prematurely. Some say that the 72 chiefs of the Guatia are an example of that teaching you've just seen mentioned. You have no conception of the severe depression of spirits produced in the mind of an old sexton, who in an evil hour has cast his spade aside and set up for a man of leisure. It may answer for a short time, a very short time. I can honestly declare that I have led a wearisome life since I gave up undertaking. Many have been the expedients I have adopted to relieve the oppressive tedium of my miserable days. The funeral bell has aroused me as the trumpet rouses an old war horse. How many processions I have followed as an amateur. 1 or 2 young men of the craft have been exceedingly kind to me, and have given me notice whenever they have been employed upon a new grave, and have permitted me to assume myself by performing a portion of the work. My own condition since I left off business and tried the terrible experiment of living on my income and doing nothing has frequently and forcibly reminded me of a similar passage in the history of my excellent old friend Simon Alwick, the tallow chandler, with whom I had the happiness of living in the closest intimacy, and whom I had the pleasure of marrying about 20 years ago. Mr. Alwick was a thrifty man, and having acquired a handsome property, his ambitious partner persuaded him to abandon his greasy occupation and set up for a gentleman. This was by no means the work of a day. Mr. Alwick loved his wife. She was an affectionate creature, and next to the small matter of having her own way in everything, she certainly loved Alwick as her prime minister. In bringing that matter about, she was what is commonly called a devoted wife. Man is marvelously a creature of habit. So completely had Alwick become that creature that when his partner, upon the occasion of an excursion as far as Jamaica, pond, for which Alwick literally tore himself away from the chandlery, could not restrain her admiration of that pretty pet lake. He candidly confessed that he felt nothing of the sort, and on Miss Alwick exclaimed, with uplifted hands and tears in her eyes, that in a cottage on the borders of such a lake, she should be the happiest of the happy. So should I, my dear, said her husband with a sigh, so heavily drawn that it seemed 4 at the pond. So should I, my dear, if the lake were of clear melted tallow, and I had plenty of sticks and wicks. Suffice it to say, Miss Alwick had set her heart upon the measure. She had a confidential friend or 2, to whom she had communicated the project. Her pride had therefore become enlisted, for she had given them to understand that she meant to have her own way. She commenced an uncompromising crusade against grease in every form. She complained that grease spots were upon everything. She engaged the services of a young physician who gave it as his deliberate opinion that Mr. Alwick's headaches arose from the deleterious influence of the fumes of hot grease, acting through the olfactory nerves upon the pineal gland, which is a wonderful gland to play around with, right? He even expressed a fear that insanity might supervene, and he furnished an account of an eminent tallow chandler in London who went raving mad, and leaping into his own vat of boiling grease was drawn out no better than a great candle. It was a perfect coup de grace when Miss Alwick drove candles from her dwelling and substituted oil. The chandlery adjoined the residence in Scrap Court, and it must be admitted that with the wind at south, the odor was not particularly savory. Miss Alwick was what the world would style a smart woman, and she was in the habit of calling her husband a very wicked man, and their mansion the most unclassical villa, though in the very midst of Greece. Not the Greece with the C. It is quite superfluous to say. The point was finally carried. The chandlery was sold. A country house was purchased, not on the lake, but in a sweet spot. There was some little embarrassment about the name, but 2 wild gooseberry bushes having been discovered within half a mile, it was resolved in council to call it Mount Gooseberry, since the going forth of Adam from Eden in misery and shame, never was there such an exodus as that of poor Alwick from the chandlery. I have not time to describe it. I am glad I have not. It was too much. Even Miss Alwick began to doubt the perfect wisdom of her plan, but the die was cast. On they went to their El Dorado. It was a pleasant spot. It was a bonny day in June. The birds were in ecstasies. So was Miss Alwick. So were the children. The sun shone, the stream ran beautifully by, the leaves still glistened in the morning dew. There was a sprinkling of lambs on the hills. Old Cato was at the door to welcome them, and Carlo most affectionately covered the white frocks of the children with mud. Was there ever anything like this? Exclaimed the delighted wife. Isn't it a perfect pink, Papa? Cried the children. In answer to all this, the Depor Ulcerosum of poor Alwick sent forth a deep groan that shook the very walls of his tabernacle. The mind of man is a mill, and will grind chaff if nothing more substantial be supplied. And peradventure the upper will grind the nether millstone of destruction. For a brief space, Mr. Alwick found employment. Fences were to be completed. Trees and bushes were to be set out. The furniture was to be arranged. But all this was soon over. And there was my good old friend Simon Alwick, the busiest man alive with nothing to do. Never was there a heart in the bosom of a tallow chandler so perfectly untraveled. Poor fellow, he went up stairs and downstairs and in my lady's chamber, but all to no other purpose than to conform him in a sentiment of profound respect for that homely proverb, "It is hard for an old dog to learn new tricks." "Where is your father?" said Miss Alwick to the children after breakfast one awful hot morning near the end of June. The children went in pursuits. There he was. He had sought to occupy his thoughts by watching the gambols of some half a dozen Byfield cookies. And there he was. He had rested his arms upon the rail of the fence and had been looking into the sky. His chin had dropped upon his hands. He had fallen asleep. He was mortified and nettled at being found thus, and continued in a moody condition through the day. On the following morning, he went to the city and remained till night. His spirits were greatly improved on his return, and to some felicitations from his wife and family, he replied, "My dear, I feel better, certainly, and have made an arrangement which I think will enable me to get along pretty comfortably. I've seen Mr. Smith, to whom I sold the chandlery, and I've extended the term of payment. He still dips on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and has agreed to set a kettle of fat and some sticks for me in the little closet near the back door, that I may slip in and amuse myself on dipping days. I ought to have been warned by this example, but had quite forgotten it. It is very agreeable to be thus welcomed back to the performance of my former duties. No one but he who is deprived of some long-cherished occupation can truly comprehend the pleasure of occasionally handling a corpse.